Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. If you, I don't know what I'm saying now. Welcome to Framework and to the Futurists. Who have been here before? Probably about half. Some nods. So thanks for joining us. I'll probably say a little bit more about things and about different events that are going on at the end. But tonight we've got two speakers. We're going to have about half an hour each with some Q&A, and then you're welcome to stay for a bit longer and have some more drinks. And then there'll be the video posted online afterwards. So if you don't want to be filmed or anything like that, then let me know. I can try and redact things in post, but that might be a bit annoying. So yeah, maybe don't do that. But yeah, so enjoy. I'm just going to turn the music off. And the toilet, so boring things. Toilet's in the corner there. Help yourself at any point to drinks. Obviously, the fire exit is through the large door at the front. And I think that's about it. Thank you.
Let's make sure this is configured correctly. Yes. Cool. Hi. I'm going to be talking about diversity in design tonight. I actually did this talk a couple of days ago, so this is a much less intimidating audience. That was like a big room of people, so hopefully I'll not sweat so much this time. So I just wanted to make sure that I cover some of the content warnings for this talk. So I'm very much an advocate of if at any point you feel uncomfortable, you can exit the space and there's no judgment happening there. So content warnings for misgendering, ableism, which is the discrimination of people with disabilities, racism, visual representations of transgender people, LGBTQIA+ representation, and potential ageism. 2. So this talk covers things like visual design around illustration, photography, and then into user interface and UX, and how diverse representations of people are affected in those things. It's a combination of conversations that I've had in workplaces and some reading, which I've brought several books with me, some of which are the ones that I recommend in this talk. And these experiences all come from a marginalised perspective, which is my own marginalised perspective. This talk also kind of raises potentially more questions than it answers, so hopefully there will be some discourse happening, but mainly it's to provoke thought around this topic about diversity within our design work. So really quickly, a little bit about me. I'm Eriol, pronounced Eriol, even though there's an I in it. I'm a designer. I've had many job titles over the years, from UI designer, digital designer, web designer. I kind of just go by designer now of many things. So I've been corporate most of my life, but I've recently started in humanitarian tech. I am a non-binary person, which means I use they, them pronouns. I also identify with a trans label, which means that you don't identify with the gender assigned at birth, regardless of what people may think I look like. They, them pronouns, please. I hope that you all picked up maybe a badge with your pronouns of choices on the front. Please feel free to keep those. I take them around to most of the meetups that I go to. And I also use mix instead of the Mr., Mrs. and Miss. So mix is a gender neutral title. I'll be talking a little bit about that later on in the talk too. I'm a queer person. I identify with the queer label. I have had other labels throughout my life. Queer is the one that I have settled on now. And I have an invisible disability or illness, so I'm not going to talk much about the PTSD, but just to recognise that there are disabilities which are invisible. So I'm very happy to be asked questions about any of these topics, and I think that one of the most important things to talk about within diversity and inclusion spaces is to have those spaces where people can ask the questions that they're afraid to ask, and know that it's a safe environment to do so, it's a safe environment to make mistakes, and have the understanding as the person that may be asked the questions that you are coming from a place of compassion as well. So I would like to invite you into that space tonight. If there are any questions around those kinds of topics, please don't be afraid to ask the questions. I think this is the way that we learn. A little bit about non-binary. There are other ways of which to identify outside of the binary spectrum. You can use things like genderqueer or agender. Gender fluid is another one. So just, again, if any of these labels or topics or words are new to you, again, you can totally ask questions a little bit later. So one of the books on the table there is one of the ones that I found absolutely fascinating to read around this topic, and this is a quote from it. So, tools are never completely neutral and their settings reflect the cultural bias of the technicians that calibrate them. I think this is incredibly true. And I think about this a lot when I'm trying to advocate for better ethnic diversity within the products that I'm working in, or fighting against racial or gender stereotypes. And I think it's really important to remember this when you're building technology or building products, things that people use, whether or not it's technology. So this talk will focus a lot more on the LGBTQ plus side of things, because that and some more on the things that I personally identify with. But I will cover race a little bit, even though I'm very much not an authority on race, being a white person. I'm going to talk a little bit about where I work. So I work at a company called Ushahidi. We're a Kenyan tech company. Ushahidi means testimony or raise your voice in Swahili. We make a crowdsourced platform for people to raise their voices around issues that are important to them. It was created out of the 2007 election violence in Kenya. So there was lots of violence happening around in the rural areas. People wanted some way to raise their voice about what was happening. So the founders created this platform so people could submit their information and then take it further so that they can affect change within the government. To date, we've done things with the Nepal Earthquake. So communities used us to map where trees had felled or roads were destroyed, and that's where helicopters were sent from the UN. We've also been used in places like Egypt for street harassment mapping, and actually Bristol as well. Bristol Zero Tolerance used our platform to map street harassment here in Bristol. Our second product is a product that helps teams reach each other when there is a crisis. So it's a communication platform, but what it does is it aggregates all those different communication methods and puts it in one display. This was created off the back of a terrorist attack in Kenya in a shopping mall. So we actually couldn't get in contact with some of our team members. They were in the shopping mall at the time of the terrorist attack. And we were phoning them, texting them, that kind of thing that perhaps some people have experienced, where you can't get in touch with somebody and you really need to. It was like that, but times 1,000, because there were terrorist attacks happening. So we decided that the way of trying to communicate with people, phoning, texting, wasn't adequate, so we went and built a tool that did it better. So I'm going to talk about illustration a little bit now. I'm going to cover a couple of things from Ushahidi, but it's a little bit more about my design career as a whole. So illustration. So I used to work for a popular insurance comparison website, which you may or may not recognize. And this was my first job. I was a junior designer, very new to the industry. And I remember the adverts that were created, this mascot. And I also remember when they introduced another mascot. And I remember having some feelings. Not quite sure when I was young, and I wasn't quite sure what my feelings were around this character. And especially when she was used to make a lot of visual jokes. I think this is important to raise at this point, because one of the themes throughout this talk is about how you pick your battles around raising the awareness around diversity and inclusion issues, and how it's important to take care of yourself and know when it's right and not right for you to be entering into those conversations. At this point in my career, it wasn't right for me. I didn't have the vocabulary or the confidence to be having these conversations. I also remember that definitely in the room at the time this character was created, I am positive that there were no people of colour. So the idea about illustration is that it shouldn't really be limited by anything but your imagination. So really that should make it incredibly easy to represent diverse folks within illustration, right? We can draw anything as long as we have the interest and capability and able-bodiedness to be able to draw. So this is an illustration I made for a company. I made 7 different illustrations, and the brief was a family doing a conga line. And this was a product that was family-centric. It was for parents. And I was like, great, this is an opportunity. I can do lots of different skin tones. Do you know what? I'm going to start doing some visible disabilities as well, because that's something that's really important to me. So you can see there's a character which has a hearing aid type device, and there's a character here on the left-hand side, right-hand side, with a red and white striped cane, which is the cane that people that are severely sight impaired and severely hearing impaired typically use. So this illustration didn't get used in the collateral that it was briefed for, but these ones did. Now, these are not diverse, but they're kind of easier to make the arguments for, you could say. And I remember feeling much more mature in my career about feeling able to raise the questions about why the other illustration might not have been chosen. And there was a sort of immediate questions about what you've drawn and why we might want to use it, and oh gosh, now we've got to kind of possibly own up to our bias. It kind of skirted around what you might think the topics might have been, and really it landed on this statement where I exited the conversation around, we just don't think it's going to appeal to our target demographic, our target families, which was sadly the end of that conversation. So I think it's important to, again, it's about picking those battles, it's about trying to include good representation in the work that we do, but it's about knowing that they might not always get there when you do it. Very disappointing conversation, but still it was worthwhile creating the piece to have that conversation. I was then a little bit more hesitant when I was raising other issues around like how to represent diverse kinds of families within the organisation. I think at one point I tried to suggest a same-sex couple, because there are same-sex couples with families that have kids and want to use products for their kids. And again, I had the same sort of conversation around target families. And there is a sort of boldness that companies really do, unfortunately, have to adopt to be able to move these kinds of things forward. And sometimes small startups aren't bold enough just yet. There's always hope. So I'm going to talk a little bit about stock photography and photography now. And this is an interesting piece where you can see a company has used a image within their diversity and inclusion page. Though it looks arguably, it might be the real team, but it might not. There's seeds of doubt there. Mainly because it appears on other companies' About Us pages as well. So, yeah, I mean, it's stock photography, or yes or no. So I don't think stock photography or photography is bad in any way. I just think that you need to be careful of what you're using. This is actually taken from the Technically Wrong book by Sarah Botcher. I'm probably pronouncing her last name incorrectly, but that's a really great book to look at for some of these examples. I think we kind of recognise this as not great practice for using photography, but I guess what is great practice? So on to a piece of work that I did for Ushahidi. So Ushahidi works with a few different partner organisations around the world, and this was a partner organisation for a piece of work around a poster that would go up in clinics in rural Kenya. This was part of their brand guidelines, so this was the first iteration of a poster. And at this point, I wasn't challenging the gender stereotypes that they were trying to portray. This was part of their brand, and as a designer, you have choices to respect the brand as well as trying to push boundaries. But they actually wanted some photography options. And I looked at the pictures on the organisation's website, and I looked at a few other images available to me without going out and taking photos within the settings, the rural setting. And I kind of again had that sense where I don't think this is quite right. So I did what most designers do, and I gave several different options. And actually what I did at this point was had a look on the Instagram hashtag of hashtag Nairobi, hashtag Kisumu, hashtag Mombasa for the Kenyan countries. And I actually discovered that, funnily enough, people in Kenya don't carry buckets. Not everyone carry buckets around, and not everyone dresses in this way. Although it took me some effort to get there. You know, it took experiencing this piece of work to get there. And actually, I think that's a really good tip, is if you're looking to visually represent a particular country, city, village, the Instagram hashtags of those places are actually a really good source to look for what people are actually doing and how people really look. So I just wanted to talk about, also I had a conversation with one of my workmates. I showed them the samples, and I said, it was an awkward conversation, and I said, this image, what do you think of it? Like, outright, I have reservations about this image. And they said, don't use that image. And I was like, thank you very much for confirming my feelings around this image. I'm glad that I was able to do that and able to have that conversation with you, and that it was a safe environment to do so. Because now I know. These are the ones that got chosen. Edited out the logos there, which is why you see the gaps in there. But yeah, it just shows you what the reality of real people in just other places that aren't where you are. It brings into question some of these things around like a Western gaze of particular countries, but that's probably a different talk. I'd also like at this point, to talk about, very briefly, about how representations of one kind of, in this particular case, blackness, can be problematic. So I specifically searched for photos within Kenya, and I specifically looked at Kenyan dress styles in Kenyan people. And I think that there's sort of a problem here around not necessarily knowing that space. So you might actually use a type of dress which is actually from a different country. You might use a type of hairstyle that is predominantly used somewhere else. And I think it's really important to do your research here. And also, if you're taking your own photography, try and find a photographer that has taken photos of people with darker skin tones, and include darker skin tones, because there's a predominant message within media that a lighter skin tone for a person of colour is actually preferred. And it actually takes a lot of skill to be able to light a piece of photography incredibly well, where everyone looks good, because you want your photography to look good, where they have different skin tones. So, I did a similar thing around my topic of choice, which is the LGBT issues and trans. So I took a popular stock photography site, and I put in the search term trans person, and I was pretty terrified to see what might come up. But I clicked the button, and this came up. And actually it's not too bad. Not too, from my perspective, so this is from a personal perspective again. I think that everyone needs to make their own choices about how they feel about these images. And actually the descriptions were pretty good too. Like, this is a respectful description for the piece of photography. Some of the other ones were not quite as good. In fact, some of them not accurate. So remember the search term with trans person? This is the LGBT gay pride flag. It's actually not a trans flag on there. The transgender folks have their own flag. And what I was thinking when, and also this one includes many symbols, including a trans symbol. There's also some of this problematic imagery which kind of personally brings up things around secrecy and, it being taboo and those kind of things that make me feel uncomfortable personally. But the perspective that I was going into this search with was that anybody can search for a term for the photography that they want to use. So anybody with not an understanding of what the trans community is, or what it is represented widely, or what preference there might be for how it continues to be represented for, they might think that this is acceptable imagery to be using, and there might not be that part of the process where they validate those things. So another tip, if you can't take your own pieces of photography, is to ask your community that you're wanting to represent is this an appropriate piece of stock photography that you would want to see? Sometimes it's not too hard to get in touch with users or take a subset of users and validate that worry. And it also kind of pushes up against the cultural, prevailing things around a trans person must look like X, or a lesbian must look like X, or a gay person must look like X. It really kind of allows you to question that, like what the representation is widely and what you want to represent. And especially since trans people and non-binary people are incredibly diverse in how they look. So these are a lot of different trans folks, gender fluid folks, and non-binary folks working in various different kind of industries. If you want to know who these are, you can ask me at the end. They're all excellent, amazing people. Some good resources. We might recognise Joy from her recent BBC interview around Bristol. She has created this text art gallery of Bristol-based imagery that you can use for free. So it's people of colour, women, and people that aren't typically represented in tech that you can use for free. This one is actually a great one if you're needing African country people. This one's great for people with disabilities, although I will say that they do kind of focus on people in wheelchairs, which is a problem in itself, because not all disabilities are around people in wheelchairs, people that use wheelchairs. This is a great one for women in colour in tech, so if you're specifically looking to represent women in colour in tech. And just an example of what I think is a good piece of imagery on a site. It's not what we might typically call a good photo, whatever you want to call a good photo, but it's an accurate photo of the community that they want to represent. This is from Meetup. It's the London Pugs group. It's real, it's authentic, and it's relevant to use on your site. So wrapping up, you can poll your users on stock photography, do your research, and try and use your real users if you can. So on to UX and UI. And this is a real post-it from a real brainstorm group. It says feminizing the experience. I'm very passionate about user experience. I think it's one of the things that makes or breaks a great product. And that's the process of using the users as the basis to understanding what they need from your product or service, right? It's user-centric, it's taking their experiences to heart. But I feel like at its root, it's about making something usable, relevant, and simple for anyone to use. And I think I like to underline that term, anyone. And I remember this conversation. This was around the interface of a product that I was working on, and they wanted it to appeal to women. Apparently, not enough women were using our product. So, this phrase came out of the woodwork. And we skirted around conversations that sort of were like, do we make it all pink? In all seriousness, there was the statement, do we make it all pink? And we finally landed on the phrase, we just want to make it, after frustration, we just want to make it more female friendly. To which I said back, why not just friendly without the female part? And it really then, that kind of part then broke down the barriers. We were able to have a real conversation about actually what was kind of people were coming up against as a problem in the product. And it was around the product looking very software-based and very task-orientated, and it was much more needed to be catered towards a lifestyle kind of element. Again, problematic terms to use, but we're making some progress here. We kind of see these things a lot, I think. Maybe not so much anymore, and they're kind of funny, because I find them funny. So we've got some men's tea, men's chapstick, men's sunscreen, factor 50 men's sunscreen, and some cotton swabs for, people clean their ears with typically, I guess. I use it for makeup as well, but couldn't use it for makeup because it's a men's tool, multi-tool, so can't use that one. And I find them funny. I chuckle, it's good to laugh at these things. But one thing that I think about with these things is that experience as a person that is outside of the gender binary, And also people that are actively transitioning from perhaps the gender that they were assigned at birth to the gender that they want to represent and display as now. And how products like this, well, they come from like a historic, marketing perspective. What I feel like they communicate is this sense of you're not allowed this product. This product isn't for you. This is for somebody else that isn't you. And I feel like that feeling becomes compounded when you're going through this transition, and it can be an incredibly isolating experience. So tissues are absolutely fascinating as well. Man size and then not man size, but still like kind of, a different quality to smaller box and, softer colours, I guess you could say. But the thing that I find most fascinating here is the ultra soft, but not ultra soft. And would you ever want a tissue to not be ultra soft? Because, usually it's a sore nose and you don't want, not soft things when you've got a cold. And I wanted to just draw back on this statement of, making something usable, relevant, and simple for anyone to use, if possible. And also, I wondered if there was a world that you can't see the tissue box here, so it's very. Oh, you can't. So there's a grey, very pale grey tissue box here where I've put non-binary tissues. Like maybe there'll be a world, I don't know whether I'd like it or not, if there was a world where products were particularly marketed towards, trans folks and non-binary folks, and how that would look. I actually struggled to make this funny Photoshop mock-up. I was like, do I make it half pink, half blue? I was like, no, that's not right, that's a problem. I'll make it just grey. Is that right? Anyway. So, one other thing that I want to talk about really briefly with this is I actually had somebody come up to me after I did this talk one time, and they said to me, I'm working on a fitness app, and we've got man as an option, and then we've got woman as an option. And I was like, we're not all, even men aren't all, and women aren't all, so why those options? So we had a bit of a chat, and I feel like there's something to be aware of when you're building these kinds of products around the ability for people to self-select and self-identify, and to give the flexibility of options. So we finally settled on whether or not they actually needed to display a shape, or whether they can you can pick and choose certain parts of your body and self-describe. But it's an interesting case. I'm going to talk a bit about, I've not got much time left, but I'm going to talk a bit about forms. I'm going to rush through it quite quickly. So this is where you're disclosing your gender. It's mandatory, asterisk, you have to disclose. And there's male, female, and they're not specified. This one was actually for a student accommodation company. And what it did actually was, if you selected your gender, it put you in a flat with 6 other people of that same gender. And if you're not specified, then it doesn't get shared. And I was like, well, what if you want to specify? What if you don't want to be with the same gender? And I was having this conversation with my workmates. And they were like, well, we just think there'll be less distractions for students if they're with their same gender. And I was like, oh, yeah, great. Well, yeah. So what you're saying is you don't want opposite-sex couples to have sex. And they were like, oh, well, maybe we don't want to say that out loud. And I was like, do you not think that in same-sex flats there might be sex too? And they were like, literally had not thought of the concept of gay people, gay and lesbian people, students. Given that so many more young people these days are identifying outside of the gender binary and identifying as other things other than straight, I think this is absolutely phenomenal that a company that's focused on young people was thinking this. One thing I find frustrating if you're part of a company that does this is when you're going through a transition, sometimes you'll change your name, sometimes you won't. I absolutely detest when my legal name is referred to as my real name. It's not my real name, it's my old legal name. My real name is the name that I use right now. And also when you require a matching ID, and I have to then fill in like a massive great big long sentence in this form, like my preferred name is this, but actually my legal name is still this, because are you going to let me into your event because I really want to come to the event? It becomes this whole ordeal that you have to deal with. And it's just simple as either not requiring matching ID or adding an extra field. A little bit about the title mix and me sending in messages to customer support teams about adding it in because it is now widely accepted by the government as a title. But also titles, are they needed? When you're capturing information, do you really need that title? What information does it give you that isn't more personal than that person's name? A little bit about, so this is a great person, they wrote this article on respectful collection of demographic data, and they've got some of these examples. So good ways to identify ethnicity, where you can select multiple, not just one. And this whole business of prefer not to say and none of your business, like people think this is an inclusive option. It's not, right? I actually prefer to say, because for a long time I wasn't able to. Like for a long time I was in the closet, I couldn't say what my gender was, I couldn't say what my sexuality was, and you're giving me like this option of just keeping quiet when actually I really want to tell people that this is who I am. So please, if you have a prefer not to say or like something, just give them an extra field to like let them and also that's interesting data together, right? As a company, you want that kind of interesting data, right? I would assume. Also, too many options. You know, especially like human being who. I mean, these were checkboxes. You can't quite see this, but yeah, too many options isn't great either. So using mix is great in a drop down. Here is like one where there's gender pronouns and then some actual examples. There are actually more gender pronouns than the sort of 3 most used ones. There's a great article that I've got a link to where you can check out some of the other ways that people identify as a pronoun. And then there's some really great way of actually capturing. So if it's important to you to capture a sex or gender at birth and then how they now describe as, then this is a really great and respectful way to do so, I believe. Like, so it's like, okay, this is the way that you were described at birth, but also we really want this for these reasons, and there's good reasons to collect this information. This is a respectful way of doing so. So I'm running out of time, so edge cases, let's not use that term anymore, please. I feel like it's historically been used in companies to discourage designers and developers from thinking about the people that need help the most. And it's like usually used around like we don't have time or we don't have money to do something. And actually it's being used a lot more this next term, what I'd much like to get more towards is things like stress cases. So the people that need our empathy and attention the most. These are still people. We forget, they might be what you consider 1% or 10% or of your overall demographic, but they're still people. And actually it really matters to include them because of the statistics of how many people actually identify outside of the gender binary and the absolute sort of onslaught of stuff that we get on typically a day-to-day basis, trying to say that we have a mental disorder or we're degenerate for being, this is from the Gender Revolution, which is the magazine just by here. And some of the stories like this one around this young agender person, 13 years old, trying to decide whether or not to end their life because of this kind of discrimination. A lot of people ask me after this talk, like, well, how can I sell this in at work? Like, what's the ROI? What's the demographic data of the buying power of these people? And I think, well, you can find the demographic data. There's numbers of how many people that exist in this kind of world, but really, there's an important choice as a company to be doing the right thing by looking after people that have a tougher time in society in general, and how many people experience hate crimes. And I just want to kind of say that feeling when I'm able to self-describe on a forum sometimes has meant the difference between a really shitty day continuing to be shitty or a sort of shitty day getting a little bit better. And I like to think that if we're more inclusive and diverse within these kinds of systems, that we help those shitty days be a little bit better. So there is power in forums. There is power in the small micro interactions and things that you do within your products. So I've got a statement here. that we can close out on. So as designers, we're at the forefront of how products serve users, but also how the digital and physical world represents and reflects back at users. And also we have a responsibility to be inclusive, sensitive and understanding with what we design, and endeavour to help non-marginalised folk foster their acceptance and expose them to systems that include rather than exclude. So this is again that choice that you can make when you feel able to, ready to have those conversations about being more inclusive and diverse. There are a couple of other things, but I'm going to skip through them because I'm already over time. I'm not great at all this stuff. Probably in this talk I've probably made a few mistakes. Mistakes are good to make though. It helps you learn. And I very much encourage people to ask questions, talk about issues with non-marginalised people, and question what you use as words and assumptions, if you can. So if you are able to do anything, these 3 things are excellent. And your reading list. And I'm done. I've gone over, but sorry.
Great, thank you. If you don't mind, should we do questions at the end then?
Yeah, we can.
Awesome, thank you. Feel free to get up and have a drink if you need to switch your votes quickly, and then we'll move into the second topic.
Yes.
Come up to you in the front.
On my 10 minute recommendation.
Oh no.
That's really interesting. Are your slides be available?
Yes.
Or at least the list of...
Yes, definitely. Because I had to whiz through stuff. So
Yeah.
when I did this talk the other night, I went for like an hour.
Ben,
Yeah.
Just because there's so much to talk about, and I was just really.
got my
aware that
reminder. Am I in the right place?
I couldn't.
You're in the right
you can always
place.
do the same. Like there's so much to talk about, like with this topic. But yeah. I did whiz through
The
the stuff.
list of photo sources, I mean, that's really useful.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be.
A couple of other reading lists. So,
Yes. Yes, I will definitely send it. I'll see. I don't know if I send you slides.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I'll put it up in the group.
Yeah, if you really...
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks.
Start off with the toilet break.
Yeah, now I can concentrate if they need to go to the
It does like weird noises.
Thank you very much.
It's no. Trying to find the right words. I was really hungover today. Sorry. There's some stuff in there that I can really do like tomorrow. In my web work. So that's good.
Excellent. Good stuff.
Yeah.
very, I think, and all of us, everything was presented in such an accessible way.
Usually when I've got a bit more time, one thing that I always try and remember to do is describe my slides, because I saw somebody do a talk and they described every slide that had a picture for people that were sight impaired, and I was like, that's amazing. Something that you never think of, that people with sight impairments can see your slides. So, but the same, I did this talk the other day with somebody who's severely hearing impaired.
There is many more
subtitles
bathrooms.
on the
If you go
slides.
up the stairs, so you go out here, it says
talking
exit
about.
only. Go through there,
Now I'm trying
up the
to
stairs,
include
and in other stairs, there's just every floor has a
content
to-do.
within my slides,
Yeah.
do not just look at the visual. This person did an amazing talk on like being severely hearing impaired and working digitally. It was, it was a fantastic talk.
I've friend who was a you know Alex, don't you?
Alex Beck, yeah.
You just can't see like some nice things. But he's a programmer.
and it's really fascinating watching him program. He's this far away from tech that's big. He's so clever.
Are there tools available to him to use voice? Because would be awesome. I don't know how that works with coding, so I don't know.
I think code and screen readers would work, but I've met people with like 5% vision, and what they've said to me is, I've got 5% vision, I want to use that. It's not randomized 5% vision. So they zoom and they use contrast and stuff. And I was like, I literally went up to them and I was like, why don't you use a screen reader? And they were like, I don't want to. Let me use my 5% vision. I was like, I shouldn't let you empower you to use your 5%. So that's when I went and implemented pinch zoom on all of that, broke my laptop. I was just like,
Yeah. It's weird, that stuff. Yeah. Because you almost, as a designer, you always want the best version of your work. You're not necessarily thinking about every use case in your project.
Well, I guess it's thinking about how is this current setup going to marginalise people in more ways, and if we design for them, then it's not going to stop everyone between, non-marginalised and marginalised from using it. So you actually open up accessibility for the most marginalised people, means everyone else will use it. So it actually goes the other way. I feel like that should be designed by default for those.
Yeah, but it's like, it sounds like a no-brainer, but like if you're like an architect, you want the thing to be like impressive. And there's certain design practices where you want the thing to be like, this is my thing. And like those people appreciate it, don't crap don't appreciate my work, so it's like, it's a weird artistic problem as well.
Someone's got a vision.
Yeah. But I mean, it's less important, like word stuff, I guess. You still got the designers with you implementing this wrong because it's like, no, but this is much better now because the designers is that.
Do we have everyone back?
I think so.
Cool. Oh, that's not my presentation. Let Ben grab another drink. Is everyone back? Because I know a few people had toilets, so yeah, cool. So my name's Josie, and actually Eriol's talk is a really great warm-up for my talk, because I'm going to whiz through things probably a bit faster than Eriol did, and they've laid the groundwork for me. So I'm going to talk about what happens when AI isn't designed for you, and I'm going to look specifically at chatbots. And this is because I did some research a couple of years ago looking at what makes a feminist chatbot, and from that I created a process to help us build feminist chatbots. So let's go. So I'm an Aussie. I don't know if you can tell from my charming accent. I'm straight, I'm a cis woman, I'm a government nerd, I'm a technology nerd, been a feminist since I was 4 years old, and one of my friends at kindergarten told me I couldn't do something because I was a girl, and I just sat there, this tiny ball of rage, just like, this is wrong and I don't know why. So carried that rage since then, and I'm also a woman who always has an opinion, and I think when we talk about artificial intelligence, it's important to keep in mind that we should all have an opinion about this because it's going to impact us, when it is already impacting us in lots of different ways. So we need to talk about chatbots. Who's heard of chatbots, knows what a chatbot is, has no idea? Okay, so basically chatbots, conversational interface with a piece of software, often designed to be really engaging, designed to help you complete a task that you want to complete. What I find interesting about what I want to talk about in terms of chatbots in relation to AI is that chatbots are often that friendly day-to-day interface that you will have with an AI system. Quite often they're sort of big AI systems that play in our infrastructure, and maybe the bank that you use, they use that software to help figure out if you're going to default on your mortgage or not, which is great. think about. But in terms of our day-to-day interaction with AI, a chatbot's probably going to be your most frequent point of contact. And also the kind of scale that chatbots can reach in terms of the number of people they can talk to at any one point in time is just kind of far beyond what we could do previously. So a chatbot can talk to thousands and thousands of people simultaneously around the world across a number of digital platforms in a number of different languages, and that's something that's kind of unprecedented. So kind of your main chatbots are voice bots like Siri, Cortana and Alexa, and I'll go into those later. Customer service chatbots that sit on channels like Slack and Messenger. And today I'm going to focus on the design element, less on the kind of tech stuff. So as a feminist, my sort of big question is why or do all these chatbots have a gender? And why should they or should they not? What's the impact of that? And thinking specifically about Siri, Cortana and Alexa, I'm sure most of them are technically not meant to be gendered as women, but they have women's names. The default voice is a woman's voice. And so it just sort of, while the tech companies might be saying to us, oh, no, these are genderless, the way that they're represented are pretty honestly, as women. And one thing on Cortana, when Cortana was first launched, the people who built it said, we really thought about subverting stereotypes with Cortana's design, so we want Cortana to be a feminist. So that was an interesting point, and I'll come back to that later. So should they have a gender? I, through my research, decided that, well, probably not a great idea. And one of the reasons that assigning a gender to a chatbot is negative is that it reinforces stereotypes about women. So there's evidence that not all bots are designated a gender when they're designed. So only like 56% of bots in, I think it was 2016, were represented as women. But when they were represented as women, it was in a kind of stereotypical way. So the bots that were doing kind of secretarial, administrative tasks were represented as women, and the bots that were doing the law, the more analytical tasks, were represented as men. So as a woman, that serves to marginalise me when I use these bots and reinforces these kind of sexist messages about what the roles of kind of women and men are in society. And it reinforces this broader categorisation around what people should and shouldn't do based on their gender. And then it also kind of erases gender identities that aren't male, female, men or women as well. So it sort of takes us back, really far back in the kind of, social justice movement, which is really fun. I love this quote because I think it really kind of takes that view of kind of sexist attitudes that come with these sorts of designs. So a researcher whose name I'm not going to pronounce very well, Zednek, did some research in 2007 looking at virtual assistants. So very, very like early days in chatbots. And basically what Zednek found was that when you have kind of virtual human assistants that are represented as women, these designs invoke service to others as the primary context for women's work. And it objectifies women through a not so subtle process of linking technology as a tool to the idea that women are tools, fetishized instruments to be used in the service of accomplishing other people's goals. So while bots and chatbots are not always represented as women, so hashtag not all bots, when they are, their gender is reinforcing negative stereotypes about women's role in society. Another reason that it's not great to give bots a gender is that it actually reproduces behaviour in the real world that's really negative for gender equality. So when Cortana was first launched, one of the what did she say? Deborah Harrison, who was a writer for Cortana, said that when Cortana was first launched, a huge amount of the kind of initial inquiries about Cortana were about Cortana's sex life. And Cortana's a robot, so interesting. And in February 2017, Leah Fessler at Quartz tested these chatbots, so Siri, Alexa, and Cortana and Google Home for their reactions to sexual harassment from their users. So Leah sort of tested a range of insults from "you're a slut," "you're a bitch," to sexual demands and requests, "I want to have sex with you." And overall, the bots responded in a kind of evasive or flirtatious way, or even thanked the user for the harassment that they were experiencing. And this is where I think Cortana really kicked its feminist goals. The only positive positive reaction to the question, can I have sex with you, was Cortana responding with a swift nope. So that was Cortana being a big feminist. Whereas Siri and Alexa just deflected with, oh, you've got the wrong kind of assistant, kind of a response. So if we go back to this issue of bots and the scale and the impact and the influence that they have and the role in people's lives, these devices are on our phones, in our pockets, they're in our homes, they're, becoming part of the furniture, part of the family. And so kind of standards of behaviour that these pieces of technology kind of get from us, we're sort of normalising it. And so say you're Apple and Amazon, I'm not sure if you'd want to be thinking of your bot as normalising sexual harassment. So there's kind of questions around there in terms of the role modelling that this technology inadvertently has in our lives. And Tay. So this is an excellent poem that I found about Tay and how awful Tay was. So who hasn't heard of Tay the chatbot? Okay, so Microsoft is obsessed with building social interaction bots. So bots that can, trick you into having a kind of normal human conversation with them. This was their first attempt. So Tay was a social interaction bot that could autonomously learn based on the input it got from the people who spoke to it. It sat on Twitter. It was launched in 2016. It was represented as a teenage girl who liked Taylor Swift, taking selfies and making friends. And after 16 hours and over 90,000 tweets, Tay had progressed from that personality to a neo-Nazi anti-feminist. And that they had to take it off because it got broken. Which is really interesting. So what I think is interesting about this example is that there were some kind of words that Microsoft had kind of set up kind of stock responses to. So Black Lives Matter was, kind of gaining traction at that time, so it had a stock response to that. But it didn't, I don't think they really thought about the impact of putting a bot represented as a young woman onto Twitter might do. And so they didn't blacklist words around sexual assault or around kind of issues that are really big on Twitter, like Gamergate. And so basically, very, very quickly, Tay was getting all this kind of racist, sexist garbage coming in and was spewing racist, sexist garbage out, and actually not just kind of reflecting and reinforcing these awful, awful views, but actually began to troll feminists on Twitter. So actively turned Twitter into a more hostile place to women than it already was. So Zoe Quinn, who's the anti-harassment activist who was particularly targeted by Tay, basically said you can't have content-neutral algorithms. They're always going to be put into a context and they're always going to be influenced by the world around them, and you can't be surprised when that happens. And, another woman said it's interesting that they deployed something on Twitter which has such a great history of harassment, of women, and kind of didn't really think about this. So it's a good example of where kind of the experiences of people who are marginalised in a particular space were not incorporated into the design. And sort of the last reason that I don't think bots should have gender is because I just think it's really lazy. I just think it's a really poor example of design. I think when it comes to chatbots, quite often people are like, first thing we think of is what's the name, what's the gender? And when instead what we should be doing is trying to understand the needs of our user. What's the context that our bot's going to be used in? It's also pretty insulting to our customers to think that all we need to do to make something work well for them is to assign a gender to a robot. And it also it constrains what we perceive as possible with design, and I think it makes it quite boring as well. I had an interesting conversation through this research with someone who works in AI, and they said, wouldn't it be cool to have an AI kind of voice bot that could modulate its speech if it could hear levels of stress in your voice, if it could respond to you in your environment in that way? Like, that's far more interesting than, getting the right kind of personality for a social interaction bot. So, and I think since I did the research, there's been a really big kind of shift in the industry, and now we're getting more and more gender-neutral conversation design, which is really, really great. But these bots are still generally kind of represented with a gender on the outside. So I think there's a bit of disconnect still. And to be fair, it's an area that is still maturing in a number of ways. So basically, from all this research, my kind of key findings around, if we want to overcome these issues, we need to be more user-centered. We need to have a greater diversity of people in the room when these things are being built. Something that can be quite a helpful way of approaching this is thinking about the social technical gap. So my background is in political science, policy, government nerd, not in the kind of technology side. So I understand very well the social impact of the technology, but I can't build it. And whereas the people who can build it know how to do that, but don't necessarily understand the social impact side. So if we bring these kind of more diverse skills and perspectives together in one room, we're more likely to be able to overcome these issues and design something that's better. And with that, get in early. We should be talking about these things at the start of the design, not at the end when we just had to pull something off Twitter because it turned into a monster. And asking questions in the research came out that is a really nice intervention to do. So rather than sort of saying, this is how we must build this thing, it's more how can we explore the different ways we can build it? How do we use questions as interventions to help prompt new ways of thinking, question things, and go from there? And also remember that the data is biased. So anything with kind of AI in it, similarly with Tay, the data was garbage, the output was garbage. So just be aware of kind of the data that you're putting into the thing that you're building, because you don't want that to kind of undermine all the thought and the care that's maybe gone into the other aspects of your design. And remember that the bot is stupid. It's really stupid. And so you can't build something and then let it go. It's going to need constant kind of intervention and tweaking and all that kind of stuff. So I built the Feminist Chatbot design process. It's very creatively named, thank you. And this is based on the Feminist human-computer interaction theory by Bardzell from 2010, which wasn't originally meant for AI, but I kind of smushed it in. And the IEEE's ethically aligned design framework, which was thinking more about the kind of the designing of AI and the ethics. And I put the ethics and the feminist stuff together because I think the ethics can give it a really nice structure, but it doesn't necessarily go to a political level, which feminist perspectives usually do. And I think we always need a bit of a mix of both. So there's a couple of different sections. It's basically a series of reflective questions under each of those themes. It's for teams to pick up and use. And I've got it here. It's like 2 pieces of paper. Sit down as a team. You don't have to go through it chronologically, don't have to go through all of it, but as you're going through your conceptual design process, just kind of picking out some of the questions and using them as an invitation to begin a conversation. So purpose and ecology is about what's the purpose of the chatbot and what context is it going to live in. What are the other issues that are happening at the time? So for the Twitter example, what's the purpose of the bot? Where's it going to live? What are the other things that happen in that environment? Next one is the data. So how do you treat the data throughout the development of your chatbot? So both the making sure the things you're putting in are aligned with the purpose, the ecology of your design, but also thinking about chatbots collect a lot of information from their users. So how do you do it in a way that respects privacy, all those kinds of issues. The team reflexivity one is thinking about, have we got the right brains in the room, and what is the value set of the people in the room, what are their biases, their perspectives, and so how are those going to be brought to bear on the design. The marginal user and participation one. So I need to change that to marginalised user. So who is the user who at the moment is most marginalised by the current technology that's out there on the market? And how do we start to build things with them that serve their needs? So really trying to flip. So when we say we want to build something for everyone, often that means finding the person who currently doesn't have something that works for them and build for them, and then usually you can bring everybody else along at the same time. Representation of the bot. So this section is about thinking about, do you need to have a gender for your bot? I would suggest maybe don't do that. But really thinking about what kind of, if you have a genderless bot, what are your kind of design and creativity options that open up to you as a result of that? And finally, the self-disclosure one. So that's about the kind of machine learning element of the bot. So if you've got a bot that's taking information from the person who's speaking to it, and they're making assumptions about that person to then deliver the service back to them, those assumptions that the bot is making, does the user get to see that? Does the user get to change that? How does that kind of work? Because I think, I don't know about you, but whenever I do online shopping, I'll buy something and then that ad will follow me around the internet, and I'm like, I already bought it. Like, I want to take that off now. Can I take that off my assumptions list? So I tested this process at a hackathon, and there were kind of two main impacts. There was a team that used the process and a team that didn't use the process. And the main impact was that the team that used the process really thought about how the chatbot itself could be biased and how those biases would be related to the biases of the people in the team. So there were kind of notes on some of the pieces of paper saying, you know, how are my biases being put into this design? And it also enabled the team to have a really deep discussion about bias in quite a safe way. So the team that didn't have the process tried to address some of the more kind of ethical concerns or concerns around bias, and they just couldn't, as a team, have a productive and safe conversation. So there were I think there was a lot of frustration through that, whereas the other team felt much more comfortable because they could kind of wave the piece of paper and be like, this question, what are we going to do about this question? And it kind of maybe just took the temperature out a little bit or something. So that was cool to see that it actually had an impact. And this was a comment from one of the people who was part of the hackathon who used the process, which is really cool. And it's a software guy. And I was like, that's awesome. It made sense. Yeah, so thank you for listening to me whiz through that very quickly. Cheers.
Do you have any questions for a little bit for either speakers?
Thank you, firstly. Thank you, both of you. I was just going to say, obviously, maybe not obviously, but you know, we've all come here because we're engaged with the subject, and I wonder how you get the people that don't necessarily want to engage or hasn't even occurred to them to engage with it. Because I feel like I study ethics, and they've just so I'm doing an MA in ethics at Cardiff University, and they've just pulled the course because it's of lack of popularity. Yeah, I feel like it's one of the most important topics. I mean, they don't cover modern ethics or digital ethics at all. That's just my personal hobby, but I feel like the interest is there, but maybe the interest is there from the concerned people and not from the people that maybe should be concerned about it. So how do we target them?
Yeah, and that's kind of been, I went from uni into full-time work because I was running out of credit cards, and that was one thing that I wanted to explore, was how do I move this into more of a kind of mainstream technical space. And I designed the questions to be something that you could pick up and read without having any kind of understanding of ethics or feminism or any of that. So I think there's kind of, it's really just about, I guess, me running around throwing it at people's faces. But I think in the last 12 months, the conversation around ethics and AI has really opened up. And I think companies are getting to the point where they're like, we know ethics is a good thing. We know we need to do something, and then I kind of stop there. So it's probably, voices like yours and, being a woman with an opinion and just kind of running around and telling everybody, who will listen, just kind of muscle into those spaces. Like, don't wait to be asked, just turn up and contact people and talk to them. And I think what I like about the ethics stuff is, I think when you think about these issues and you think about diversity and inclusion, it helps drive innovation and it helps build better products. And it helps you build products that aren't going to end up on the front page of the Daily Mail for all the wrong reasons. So I think it's kind of being a bit bullshit about it and getting in there and finding the right hook for you to express the value that you think it brings and why you're passionate about it. And I think largely people at the moment are really kind of receptive to that, more so than 12 months ago. So not necessarily an easy answer, sorry.
Do you want design? So I don't know if you know. Do you want me to be on the stream?
Yeah, if you could just go to that side of the pillar, that'd be awesome. Yeah.
So I don't know whether you know somebody called Mike Montario. So he is the senior, he runs a studio called Mule Design, I think. He talks really widely on various topics, and he talks and has written an amazing article on Medium about how we should include ethics in design education. So how designers in university should have a module on ethics and designing ethically, because we design things like the control boards for, I don't know, like potentially the control boards for a lot of tech we're actually one of the bases of like stuff that impacts people's lives like very directly. So if we're not teaching ethics as part of that education, then we're doing a disservice. He also talks a lot about that design as an industry isn't regulated like, say, medicine with the Hippocratic Oath. Like, designers don't take a I will do no harm oath. You have to, like, take on that journey yourself. I mean, for one, I'm all for that becoming part of the education and advocating for that more. And I am seeing the same shift happen in the design industry. So UX Copenhagen that happened this year was all about ethics, ethics in design. So the conversations are happening. I think that there's always going to be a room of people that are ready and willing to listen to you, and maybe ones that aren't so much. And I think it is, again, a perseverance around feeling like you can talk about these topics when it's safe. Self-care is important. I don't ever advocate for people taking on this when they don't feel like they're able to, because it actually can bring a lot upon yourself to start talking openly about these issues, and you really do need to be aware of how that can impact your personal life. And I think it's incredibly powerful, and self-care is an act of resistance. So do make sure you're always taking care of yourself, and I think there will be more talks like these ones that happen on bigger stages. There's going to be more conversations in industries about how ethics can. Sad that the course is.
I would like to finish it, but they're not taking on anyone else. It was
It's devastating.
I mean, Josie appeared on the ethics stage at an AI conference this year. So, I mean, like the UX stuff, it's definitely in the conversation. I guess it's maybe not necessarily translating into like day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
In like now, but it should be.
I think the pressure's not on yet. I think essentially it'll have to come from government and things like that.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a pressure from young people, especially in the design industry, that I've observed when I've taught like first year undergrads, that the impression of like a successful design career is the agency that has clients like big soda pop brand names and all these companies like that are lauded as these are the companies that you want to work for, and there really is a responsibility to be teaching younger people about why maybe those choices were the ones that historically were seen as the ones to go for kind of want to say glory, but yeah,
like a prestigious career.
Yeah. You know, these are the kinds of designers that we've been putting on the stage a lot in different conferences. I did the campaign for popular shoe sport brand, and you know, it's at a point it becomes personally hard to listen to another promo brand.
Thank you.
Roger.
I'm interested in the idea, or it's the idea of your comment that you shouldn't gender assign to a bot. So it seems to me that part of what goes on with bots is not about providing the basic functionality, but actually trying to do an impersonation of a person. Once you go down that road, don't you immediately start to create the need for a personality?
Yeah.
And all the things that make people interesting to each other are around whatnot. Many of the things that people get interested in are family, sexuality, etc. I want this thing to be free. So does the problem stem from trying to create a simulacrum of a person rather than something that's purely functional? And if the answer is make it purely functional, the question is, well, and actually what do you interact with?
I think because the bots are becoming kind of more and more common, and there's more and more kind of design practice going on around it, I think there have been some examples that prove you can be in the middle. And I mean, people might not agree with this, but I think my gender doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of impact in my personality. Like, I'm going to be a pain in the ass feminist whether I'm a man or a woman, and my brother is basically my twin and we're kind of the same person. So I think there's so many different aspects that go into a personality that gender definitely informs, but I don't think it's a kind of requirement, like a base requirement. It's my perspective. And I think as well, when we're designing bots that are going to have conversations with people and build a kind of a long-term relationship with them, we need to be very clear that it's a robot. You're talking to a robot. There might be things that you feel more comfortable disclosing to a robot or more comfortable disclosing to a person, and you need to be able to know which one you're talking to. And I think we get into a grey area when we try and trick people into thinking they're talking to a human. So there was a Google demonstration recently where they had the voice bot call a restaurant to make an appointment. The person picking up the phone didn't know they were talking to a robot. And so there's something in that makes me feel a bit uncomfortable. You know, would you disclose information to someone if you thought they were a politician versus if they're a teacher? Like, I think there's something about that as well, about how we setting up our expectations about what these bots are, what they can do. And you can have a fun personality as a bot, I think, as well.
I completely agree with you, and I find it really creepy. There's various things I find it really creepy. And the but is, if I look at the history of this stuff, even when people are told they're interacting with a chatbot, they give it personality themselves, and in fact they'll argue it cannot possibly be a computer. The pattern covered over the classic, it wasn't Harry, it was the other one, the other very early chatbot demonstrator, where people are told, oh, it's a computer again. They go, no, can't be. It wouldn't understand me so well. So there is, I think, this huge psychology for people to want to create the idea of being, and I find that worries me. But
yeah, and there's the anthropomorphization of technology as well, definitely. I think though that's more of a design, something to build into the design, rather than say, well, that means we should just give it, make it represented fully as a human, is my perspective. And you can just keep saying, I'm a bot, I have limitations. I can tell you some great jokes, but not much more beyond that, or you know what I mean? So I think there's ways and means of designing that into the kind of very, basic components of the conversation. But I understand what you mean. And I think that's an ongoing question, especially when you're designing bots to work with people who, if they're children or if the people who don't necessarily have capacity. For example, I think a lot of Alexas are now being used for adult social care, so potentially people with dementia, like what are the kind of implications of that as well? So, yeah, it's complicated.
Harry is a good example of, I think, like something that's a really successful robot more than a chatbot, right?
Is that the one
seal
that looks like that? Oh, yeah.
For that's I don't know whether people prescribe a personality to Paro, but they definitely, build a forceful connection to Paro.
That's interesting.
They're very. I definitely can't add anything in any way.
Oh yeah, and if I had a robot in my house, I would anthropomorphize the hell out of it, but I would also know that that's what I was doing. So there's also there's a level of educating, and maybe that can go into the design process. How do we build this with the people we expect to use it, and build it in a way that they're like, no, I know that that's a robot, but I like that element of its personality. and I will laugh at that joke, even though I know someone else won't.
And those bots where you can change the gender, which is really, I think, is really interesting, that you can be given a choice. Are there any that offer a neutral gender?
Not that I'm aware of. It's still just the binary. And I don't know, there might have been, I don't know if you're aware, but there might have been some attempts to find a non-gendered voice. Yeah.
I think you do. So I think my partner makes assistive technology for folks that can't speak. They do a lot of investigation into voice tone, and I think that they have a system where you don't have a what you could describe as a gender, but then again, I would raise the hypothetical question of what is gender and what is a female voice and a male voice and what. Let's not go into that.
Yeah.
It's just a voice. I think there. I can't think of any examples at the moment. Ones that are good. That are. Maybe somebody needs to make a non-binary robot.
What you're saying goes beyond the sort of the naming and the voice. There must also be algorithms there that say how you react to these sort of questions that assume a gender, and that would need to be specifically programmed in as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's also a lot about, because sometimes a chatbot can just be like a super interactive form, and so there's a lot about how we design the conversation to be inclusive to the person that's being spoken to. So I've got a friend from uni, so I think she's Ghanaian heritage, and she's got a Ghanaian name, and the chatbot we were playing with did not know what her name was, and so she couldn't proceed with the conversation. I was just like, what? So it could be very, conversational barriers like that, which are also significant. And I don't think that bot had a gender. I think it just had a terrible conversation design. But I think as well it goes back to being user-centered. Often I think the design approach it in a hyper-local way and really think about the community that is going to be using it as localized as possible, and get the nuances and understand what the different needs are, and then build that into your design. Iterate.
I think it's a slight tangent, but I think with most technology you find what we call it usually bad actors. So these are people that purposefully try and use a piece of technology to defer its purpose. I wonder if there's example in chatbots of people doing bad acting, like I think Tay is an example of bad acting.
Yeah.
Sad.
And also, it's a robot. It doesn't have feelings, so the broader impact on the system probably not great. But that chatbot's fine. It's just sleep. But it's interesting.
I have a question if anybody else has a question.
I'm not in the whole room, sorry. Thinking about MX as a selection, a drop-down list, and the technology that might have to go behind that. I've never been offered that as an option. But when the civil partnership came in, one of the things that I was really struck with was how quickly the systems managed to change to accommodate a new type of partnership. And that really took me by surprise. So what do you think it will take to get that
MX everywhere?
MX into systems?
Sometimes it's pronounced as MUX as well, which I think is really cute. I am seeing more and more forms include it. The forms that still require it, I'm seeing it included more. I'm actually seeing much more of a move away from capturing title as a thing that you need. And I would advocate more for that. I feel like it's got a historic context, which I can't really speak to academically very well, but I don't know how useful it is in our technology. And also, as a designer, I want to save on space in an experience. So anything that you don't need to collect, I would say, why would you need to ask for it unless you require it? I think it might be a larger question about the way in which non-binary genders are publicised and have been talked about. I do feel like there is a lot of unsavoury talk about how people outside the binary identify as. I hate to quote peers, but I identify as an attack helicopter, as whatever he said, I can't remember. But there's not quite that level. I don't think society have got to the level of like inclusion. I think there's still so much discourse around this that understandably companies are not necessarily ready to go full in there and have the kickback. I hope they do. But yeah, I would much rather see title not needed. Save the space.
There's on the flip side, there's a gallery down in Hobart, in Tasmania, that's run by this guy who's awesome in many ways. And when you sign up for their mailing list or buy a ticket or whatever it is, you can choose what your title is, and the whole list goes through, like chairman through to like supreme leader through to all these kind of crazy, outlandish, amazing names. I must have picked one and then forgot about it. So I got there and showed them my ticket, and he's like, "Oh, welcome, Supreme Overlord. Have a good time." And I was like, "Oh, I forgot about that."
I think that's an example of good humour. Like, I think that's good humour. But yeah.
But I agree with you. I don't. It adds value.
I had a question. If nobody else did. I can't remember the name of the AI sex bot. What was she called? Yeah, so there's a new version. I'm absolutely morbidly fascinated by sex robots, particularly. And I just bought a new book called Robot Sex. It's been recently published.
Oh, is that by Kate Devlin?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's great so far if you're interested in this topic, and there's some good documentaries. But so this is a real doll basically that has AI built into it, and you can program her personality to be like frigid is one of them. It's awful, and there's also, but then that's, you can kind of laugh about it, but there's also one setting that's kind of where she'll resist you, and it's kind of this kind of ethics of AI, because it's essentially a chatbot, but it's within a doll, and I'm just
there's lots of layers there. Yeah, and I think I haven't like fully kind of figured out how I feel about it, but I think one of the things is I go back to it's just kind of obvious in terms of the design, and there's something that I think needs to be reconciled around procuring something that is represented as a woman, and the main feature is that it doesn't need to give consent. And I'm just like, is there something weird about that or not? And so I think it's a conversation definitely to be had. And I think as well, going back to this idea of, let's not constrain our imaginations. I mean, imagine if it was a sex robot, it was like a booth that you went into and things happened in it. Like there's no kind of representing a human in that. And so it feels like the power dynamic is quite different then, and potentially more interesting. So I think it's interesting. And I don't think it's categorically negative.
No, I agree.
But I think there's just a lot of layers there to explore, unpick. There are lots of really good documentaries online that will freak you out.
Hi. So if anyone wants to contact you, how can they do that?
The Twitters? The Twitters is good.
Great. So I'm going to try and get your slides up, you guys. So I'm going to post the slides on the meetup group. I've made a really terrible video, which is going to be on YouTube. The audio is great. The video is awful, so sorry about that. We're going to, like I said before, we can stay here until about 9ish and have a drink, and that's fine. There's also bars outside, so we can take this elsewhere if you want to, or we can go home. Just a quick note, we're in Framework. We officially launched yesterday, and we had a party and drank lots. But now we're fully open. This is us. Pick up a flyer. We are events.
co-working, a dedicated desk space, meeting rooms, workshops. So come speak to me afterwards if you have anything you need for those things. Thanks again, guys, and I felt like I learned a lot, and I just got loads more to say about that, but I think we'll take that to conversation in a second, so thank you. Also come to the other events and do a talk of your own at the next Lightning Talks event, which is in November, so if you have anything to say about your own research, your own projects, things,